Now then these, not like monastery, but these really become academic center.
Nalanda University is very significant not only in terms of this spiritual exercise that took place in that institute, but also the intellectual exercise that took place in Nalanda by the prominent scholars.
The scholars of Nalanda made outstanding contributions to numerous fields of study. The many acharyas or great masters at Nalanda authored hundreds of treatises in various fields on spirituality, metaphysics, psychology, logic, medicine, astrology, arts, literature, and other subjects.
One of the most important universities in the world was developed not in the medieval West, but right here in India. And here I'm referring to the university consortium, Nalanda, Vikramashila, Somapura, Odantapuri. All of these various universities were instrumental in producing people who were capable of understanding and articulating what it means to have universal knowledge. Knowledge that's applicable across cultures and across times.
Religion is a word which is very loose expression. I don't know whether Buddhism should be put in the connotation of religion or not. If we are very strictly speaking, the religion has its own connotation. Buddhism is different from all other religious traditions, is that there's no place for unanalyzed faith or something which is to be accepted without any one's own understanding or one's own logical conclusions.
Naturally, all major world religious traditions I really respect and appreciate, admire, like Christianity, Islam, different Hinduism and Jainism, Sikhism, and Judaism, so on. All these, I think these all traditions really brought immense benefit and hope to millions of people. Now you see the differences, Buddhism and like Jainism, we have no sort of concept of creator. So one's own salvation must achieve through one's own effort.  the main obstacle about salvation is ignorance. There are many different levels of ignorance. So logically, the antidote of ignorance is knowledge, not prayer. So knowledge is so important. And then also, you see, the basic Buddhist way of approach is from this level, without sort of waiting blessing, but one's own sort of effort, then step by step become Buddhahood. So therefore, in order to practice effectively, we have to know about mind, about emotion. So in order to tackle our destructive emotion, we have to know fuller picture of the emotional world, mental world. So therefore, those Buddhist texts, the explanation about mind automatically come. So therefore, that part I consider science. Last few years, I think to 1 decade, I think number of Western medical scientists and also the brain sort of scientists, now they're really showing interest to get information, explanation from Eastern Indian ancient thought about emotion, about mind. So they found very, very useful information. in order to know the reality about the world of emotion, world of mind. So that I consider as a science. Now, in physics, also now they realize the atomic level, every moment is changing, moving like that. One time, one of my friend, the Ramana, Indian nuclear physicist, once he told me he found the concept of quantum physics, found some of the Nagarjuna's sort of writing. So he, as an Indian, he feels very proud. The quantum physics in the world is quite new. But in ancient Indian thought, 2000 years ago, already have these concepts.
The study at Nalanda was of life itself and what is reality. It was based not upon faith, but on unshakable logic and pursuit of the truth. The study was of our minds, our perceptions, and what is knowledge itself. The intellectuals here analyzed the qualities which led to enlightenment and sought to create a logical path which could lead us to Buddhahood, a path which would work for all.
Nagarjuna has a very, a significant place in Buddhist philosophy. He has propounded the Madhyamika philosophy, which is the philosophy as demonstrated in the Prajnaparamita Sutra. Madhyamika is regarded to be the highest school of thought in Buddhism.
The most overwhelmingly impressive and inspirational thing for me about the Tibetan traditions of Buddhism as received from India is the way in which those great masters of the past went to such incredible lengths to not only go and get those teachings and bring them to Tibet, but the masters, the Indian masters who travelled, went through incredible hardships, and they were willing to put those lives on the line or even sacrifice those lives for the good or the benefit of this much greater vision in which the whole of humanity, particularly perhaps the Tibetan people in the case of bringing Buddhism to Tibet, but in a larger picture than that, the whole of humanity in preserving those traditions for the future.
In the 8th century, in the first great diffusion, Buddhism was established across Tibet by Acharya Shandrakshit and Guru Padmasambhav of Nalanda. In the 10th and 11th centuries, in the second great diffusion, Buddhism and Buddhist art were brought from Kashmir. The second diffusion was then consolidated by numerous teachers from the universities of Eastern India.
First phase begins from 7th century to the end of the 9th century, means 842 something like that. In this period, from India, almost 51 scholars and the Pandits were invited. Then after a second phase of development, it says almost 121 Indian scholars visited Tibet. They have contributed. They have revised the text which was earlier been translated.
There was no written script in Tibet till the 7th century. The acceptance of the Buddhist faith entailed the understanding of subtle philosophic ideas and profound commentaries. This transfer of knowledge would not have been possible without translating and writing it down. A very sophisticated language and a written script capable of preserving this knowledge had to be formulated.
The Tibetan script that we are using today, it's well known to be kind of created by a scholar named Sambhota, who was the first Tibetan who came to India and learned with great scholars of India, and after successful education, then he went back to Tibet and he created the script.
Oh yes, Tibetan language or script is very much copy and very much similar because it's based on one of the ancient Indian script. Once Buddhism reached Tibet and started translation, then the vocabulary which in Buddhist tradition translated into Tibetan, not available Tibetan language, so created new words. So therefore, eventually, the Sanskrit vocabulary or Sanskrit terminology and Tibetan terminology go exactly the same.
The Tibetan scholars made a special effort to translate the Sanskrit works into Tibetan language by developing the Tibetan language in such a manner that it can retain the thematic meaning as well as the literal meaning with a great precision. The translations are done word by word and sentences by sentences. So therefore, this precision that is maintained in Tibetan is unparalleled.
The Acharya Shankarachit, the first person who established Buddhism in Tibet, and he emphasized the Tibetan people to learn the Buddhism not by faith but by reasoning, by logician, and by analyzing the things for oneself, as Buddha had told, not to believe which has been said by Buddha, but to understand by oneself through analyzation and through a rational mind.
There were some practitioners, but there were no tradition of monkhood in Tibet, in Tibetan community. So Shantarakshit has greatest contribution in establishing the monastic community in Tibet.
So, since the main person who introduced Buddha Dharma come from Nalanda and one of the top scholars of Nalanda, therefore, since then till now, the way we study and use extensively about logic, you see, that's, I think, the Shantarakshita, he himself, great logician, and perhaps he loves debate.
So what he did was that while the richness, the main content of this whole legacy, which is in the form of philosophy, so that he started to impart by means of the logic. So he introduced logic there in Tibet.
So I think Tibetan quite fond, you see, use Nalanda name. So all Tibetan tradition, you see, come from each different tradition. Their original sort of masters all come from Nalanda.
Atisha was one of the leading scholars of Nalanda University. Later he spent his later part of life in the Vikramshil University, and he was one of the top kind of scholar of Vikramshil University. And he was not just a scholar, he was a great practitioner himself, highly achieved great practitioner. So the initiatives were taken by the emperor and the king, and he managed to convince Atisha to travel to Tibet.
Perhaps his unique genius was to be able to take all of this very esoteric information and condense it into a form that could be understood and used by anyone.
And yet, Atisha was one master of many in India. And I think perhaps when you consider that lineage of masters that came, you can say that they must have represented a very small number of those who were in existence in India at the time. And yet, those masters in Tibet now, whose works have continued, have been preserved there in a way in which Indian Buddhism wasn't preserved in India. And so, in that sense, the Tibetans have played a hugely important role for the planet, if you consider these teachings of great value.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama has commissioned Tankha paintings of the 17 great masters of Nalanda. He has composed a hymnal stuti telling the characteristics and contributions of each of these masters or acharyas. These great teachers are celebrated till today, even in a place as far away as Kalmykia in European Russia.
The monasteries re-established in South India are of the larger monastic institutions in Tibet, and they have continued the traditional study of the all Tripitaka through its commentaries, and particularly His Holiness has named out 17 Nalanda scholars who have written most important commentaries on the Buddha's teaching, and which are studied in South Indian monasteries.
Most of the major monasteries of all the Tibetan traditions were re-established in India. These monastic institutions where erudite masters teach have attracted scholars from around the world who have come to India to study here.
It's very important to have contemplation, discussion, and the debates. While we do debate, it's further important to have an objective approach. If we do debate with a kind of an intention to just to win and to just to defeat someone, and that kind of approach really doesn't help that much to make the debate productive. The Tibetan Buddhist scholars has learned this approach of the Nalanda scholars.
Buddha himself, you see, advised us, "Oh, my follower, bhikshus and scholars should not accept my teaching out of faith and devotion, but rather through thorough investigation and experiment." So that way of approach is, I think, very suitable in modern time. And the scientific-minded people loves that kind of way of approach. So perhaps I think in modern time, see people who not easily sort of accept things, rather through investigation, experiment. So such people finds Buddhist way of approach is more realistic, more practical.
So this knowledge is a pure knowledge. It has nothing to do with dogma. It has nothing to do with a religion as such. So therefore, I call it as a legacy of India, the legacy of the world. So it must not disappear. It must remain for long.
I think the Nalanda tradition has, as it did in the past in Indian culture, in shaping the Indian culture. Now I think the time has come that